The Selma to Montgomery March is one of the most significant periods in all of American history. The marchers arrived in Montgomery on March 24, 1965, having traveled along Highway 80. They arrived at the city of St. Jude, happy but tired. The next morning, March 25th, the marchers left the city of St. Jude, led by Dr. Martin Luther King. Along Oak Street, they traveled north. When they reached Holt Street, they turned north and passed the Mount Zion AME Zion Church. And from there to Montgomery Street. And en route of traveling along Montgomery Street, when they looked to their right, they could see that federal courthouse where Judge Johnson and his colleagues had given them permission to march from Selma to Montgomery. By the time they had reached the Capitol, I imagine they were tired, but they were jubilant. That's where Dr. King gave one of his most historic speeches of all time. And many people remember that "How long, not long" speech that he gave that afternoon. Today we want to go back to 1965 and see if we can recapture the moment. And we have many of the persons who were part of that Selma to Montgomery March to offer their reflections. Some were male, some were female, some were members of different religious denominations, but one thing they all held in common: they believed that African Americans, Black people, deserved the right to vote. They wanted to make certain that the 14th Amendment was in force and the First and 15th Amendment were in force. And that's what we will present to you today.
Because no lie can live forever.
Yes, sir.
How long? Not long.
How long?
Because you shall reap what you sow.
Yes, sir.
How long? Not long.
How long?
Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne.
Yes, sir.
Yet that scaffold sways the future.
Yes.
Behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadow, keeping watch above his own. How long? Not long. Because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice.
Yes, sir.
How long? Not long.
Not long.
Because mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
Yes, sir.
In 1965, when you even attempted to register to vote, when certain people in the community learned that you had tried to register to vote, some things happened to you that were not so good. In Wilcox County, of the more than 5,000 African American men over the age of 21, only 0% of those persons were registered to vote. Let's go to Lowndes County. More than 5,000 African American men there over the age of 21. How many were registered to vote? 0. So you can see how frustrated, how angry, how upset, how concerned some of these African Americans may have been. The date was February the 18th. In Marion, Perry County, again in the Black vote, some Black people decided to hold a demonstration. One Black person who stood up to try to protect his relative from an assault by one of these law enforcement officials was killed. His name was Jimmy Lee Jackson, a Baptist church deacon. He was shot and died a couple days later at the hospital in Selma. James Bevel and a couple of others decided at that point a march from Selma to Montgomery might be an excellent way to illustrate the frustration, the concern of Black people, not just in Marion, Perry County, but in the Black Belt and really in the state of Alabama. So the Dallas County Voting League invited Dr. King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference to come to Selma and lead that march. It just so happened as those marchers left the Brown Chapel AME Church to walk those couple of blocks to the Edmund Pettus Bridge to begin their trip to Montgomery. Governor Wallace had issued an order prohibiting the march the day before. So as those marchers approached the crest of that bridge, they looked over and they saw a sea of blue, state troopers, sheriff deputies, all of these people waiting to block their path en route to Montgomery. But they were attacked within 2 minutes of that. More than 50 people had to be hospitalized that day because of that attack. What law enforcement officials had not counted on was television coverage.
When George Wallace sent his TV, he sent John down to Selma to stop the marches, what really helped the black people in the world to see were the TV cameras, because he did not anticipate the TV camera, and that what made it so successful. Without the communication, we wouldn't have to just, it'd be way more horrible thing that black people decided to being on the Edmund Pettus Bridge.
Knowing what happened in Selma the first time for Bloody Sunday, knowing I had to wait another time to get here, knowing that the people still was registering people to vote and losing their lives, you know. I was determined I was going to be a registered voter.
I had already talked to a girlfriend of mine who lived in the street right behind St. Jude. And she had told me that you can make it over and if we can march together, I'm going anyway. And I remember getting here and thinking to myself, I'm not going to find it. I had never seen that many people before in my life.
I drove out to Oak Street and Travis Street to watch the march pass by. At that time, what I wanted to do was to take the marches back to Selma, but my baby was 2 months old, and so I can get out to drive.
We ran from one side of the building at St. Jude, looking out the window to the other side, and I could just hear the teachers saying, they're coming, because they could see them out the window coming down Fairview.
So by the time the march came through, the Selma to Montgomery March, and the march organizers were looking for a place where the marchers would be safe. So it was a natural place that the march organizers turned to St. Jude for shelter and help for that.
No, I did not march from Selma to here, but I met them here on the premises. I met Harry Belafonte and Samuel Davis right out here on the ground of St. Jude.
Well, the march happened in '65, and I was born in '52. So I don't really remember anything like that. I just saw a lot of people doing things and moving around. And one particular day, I was taking my mother out to Woodcrest to my cousins, and she literally broke down and cried. And it scared me and it hurt me. And my mother said, you have to pull over, because they was doing a reenactment of that march that very day. So for you to see your mother, oh gosh, to see your mother cry about something so serious and people lost their lives, you can never imagine.
The Selma to Montgomery March was after the bus boycott being launched from this church. The people of the church who were present would have been very active in whatever happened going forward from that bus boycott on.
Well, we was hoping to see betterments of the black race as a whole. That's what the way we were being treated, we saw that we needed plenty of improvement in our situation.
So Richard Boone Roosevelt Barnett, and many others decided we are going to take what SCLC has taught us and we're going to stay here, and they organized the Alabama Action Committee. And under the Alabama Action Committee, all up and down the trail that we know, the national trail that we know, they would go in and talk to the community people there. The greater Washington Park, Mobile Heights, all the different areas, they would talk to them and say to them, what is it you need here in Montgomery? One of the things the people told them they needed was access to food. And after they talked to them, they went to the commissioners. I think they went to the commissioners about 2 or 3 times. And after they did that, they were able to get the food stamp program that our president had already put in place, but Alabama didn't want it. So when they organized, they were able to get the food stamp program here in Montgomery County and then all over the state of Alabama. They, to this day, if you get with some older people, they still call him the food stamp man. Well, behind it is just people never seen a food stamp before. And so this is just a picture of a food stamp. It has his picture on it because the artist decided that this is the way she wanted to present the food stamp for the Boom Day celebration. And Ernestine Woods put together this, and it's a part of art, like the art we see around us, the art that you see around us. We brought together different artists to help us tell the story. And on Boom Day, 7/7, we usually come together in the community. And on that day, the state of Alabama, the city, the county, all of us gather together and reach out to our community, the beloved community.
Some of those marches can tell you about the helicopters and the deputies and the military personnel in Jeeps who were protecting them from any kind of threats that might have arisen during that march from Selma to Montgomery. And as they march in the city of Montgomery to the Capitol, when you look at some of those pictures, some of those photographs, you can see some of these hecklers trying to, again, intimidate these people. But we can say with 100% assurance, the heckling was to no avail. These people were determined to march. And when you see the pictures of Dr. King standing there, giving that historic speech, and these 250,000 people along Dexter Avenue and along Bainbridge Street in front of the Capitol, that becomes a photograph, a scene for the ages. And the point of the matter is, when we place all of this in historic context, Dr. King had to convince President Lyndon Johnson that despite the passage and enactment of the Civil Rights Bill of 1964, that was not sufficient. President Johnson wanted Dr. King to believe that Southerners would rise up and block any kind of legislation that he might pass regarding voting rights. And he asked Dr. King to be cautious, just slow down for a while and not press the voting rights issue. March continued, and those marchers were not intimidated. Those marchers were determined. That was a glorious day. The weather was cold, the weather was wet, but those people persevered. The first leg of the march covered 11 miles. The second leg, another 11 miles. The last leg, 17 miles. And along the way, these marchers had secured the assurance from some black people who live along the way that they would provide a place for some of them to eat and sleep, etc. And many people today tell stories of black people along the way who came to the assistance of these marchers en route to Montgomery.
But I always tell them, always know your heritage, because without that, you don't know much about your people. The first thing I want to say about the march is that we kept people in our home. I was probably younger than 14 when that march happened, but I knew we kept people in our home. And one of the girls lost her contacts, and she said, "Y'all don't move." I didn't understand they made contacts to put in your eye. And so I just know that from that history, I realized that this march was unreal. I mean, it was real, so real that we had people in our homes. And that's why I want the young children to know it, to live it, to breathe it, and read them.
How it was together with the African Americans and the Caucasians came together as one at that particular time, and not just, okay, y'all came down here and messed up stuff. It was a together. I take that away from me because, like I said, these two ministers picked my niece up and carried her all the way downtown. It was, and I just wanted to get that. I can't forget that.
Those whites in Selma were not playing. They wanted to do everything they could to discourage anybody from marching. So until President Johnson gave Judge Johnson the assurance that the marchers would be protected, Judge Johnson did not issue an order. But once he did give those marchers the green light, he laid out where they could march twofold and where they could march in larger numbers. And he said, in the city of Selma and the city of Montgomery, you can have as many marching as you like. But along the highway, he limited those marchers in terms of how many could be on the highway at one point.
My mother was Hazel Gregory. As Mrs. Abernathy puts it, she was the caretaker of the Montgomery Improvement Association. Montgomery Improvement Association was the organization that actually handled all of the business of the Montgomery bus boycott. From the inception, they pulled together, had a board of directors. They were the ones that elected Martin Luther King Jr. as the leader. When the Freedom Riders came through, my mother was the person that went down to the bus station and kind of rescued them because they had been beaten badly. John Lewis was with that group at that time, and they, some of them were able to go to Richard Harris's house because they were able to walk and stuff. The others were not able to get up off the ground. They had been severely beaten. My mother got the local funeral homes to bring their hearse, and they came in and she was able to cross the line. They let her cross the line and she got them into the hearse and taken to St. Jude's Hospital. A lot of people had sacrificed even their lives, been beaten, been killed. My mother was at that campground and she worked that night. But the next day, as they marched to the Capitol, they also had a meeting at Dexter Avenue Church, which is right, 1 block from the Capitol. And so this picture depicts my mother, Martin Luther King Jr., Ralph Abernathy, and in the shadow that is a part of the window on the car, you see the Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth from Birmingham, who was also an integral part of that march. And of course, these are some hecklers who are trying to prevent them from peacefully marching into the church. And my mother is leading them, which is what she used to do a lot. She had real leadership abilities. This picture is of the swearing in of the first officers of the labor union that was formed at the Reliance Manufacturing Company.
That voting rights bill that President Johnson signed made it possible for Black people to vote, but it also made it possible for African Americans to seek public office. So what did we begin to have? Blacks serving on city council, county commission, running for the state legislature, running for all sorts of elected positions. A new day in American history because of what happened along Highway 80, beginning in Selma.
In order to vote back then, you had to be able to pass a written test on the Constitution. You had to be able to pay a poll tax, so that if you were 40 years old and you were eligible like the whites were to vote at 21, you had to pay retroactively all the way back, your poll tax, all the way back to age 21 in order to vote. So you can imagine that a 60-year-old person had a choice to make. Either you come up with the money or you couldn't vote. And then the third thing that you had to do was you had to have 3 upstanding citizens of the community write letters on your behalf to say that you were qualified and of good enough character to be a voter. It took all of that in order to cast a vote when he first voted. So it's pretty significant, what they were able to do back in 1946 for this community. My father was asked, this is my father, he was asked by Ms. E.D. Nixon if he could start a labor union because the Reliance Manufacturing Company, which was often called the shirt factory, there were a lot of people in this community, especially people of color, were employed by the shirt factory. And so my father sought out, he was not real sure he could do it, but then he attempted to do that. And he had to do a lot of secret meetings and that kind of stuff in order to bring it about. And they came to my dad and they threatened to put us out of our apartment because of his work on behalf of, organizing. But he finally was successful and he organized the AFL CIO branch here and then became its president and was a president of this organization. He's very proud of this but he was prouder of the fact that as a result of this, they were then tutored almost by the union, who sent people down here to help them vote for the first time.
Many of the teachers did not participate, and of course many of the students here in Montgomery didn't participate, but it's very important to understand that on this side of the bridge, many of us who did not participate, there were so many who did, but those of us who did not, the consciousness that came over here during that time, you could tell by the way we learned or the way we were raised from that point on. And I say that because I was standing near one of the young girls who became a member of the Board of Education, or I was standing near some of those who are leaders in the State House now. So it's very important to understand that once that march came here, there was something different that happened. And that's why we say on this side of the bridge, we are influenced by economic development and representation. Because after that march came here, we had a lot to get done. And all the people who didn't get arrested were those who organized and became state senators, representatives.
A lot of people lost their lives, and I was 14 at that time. So all I know is that we've always had to fight. We still got to fight. And fighting is what we do best. And in my heart, I think we've come a long, long way, but we still got a long, long way to go. In the city, in my opinion, of Montgomery, Alabama. I really admire this committee for carrying on our legacy, because I know what my parents did. I know what Rosa Parks did, who was my mother's cousin. So in my heart, I tell it's for the young people. I did mine, but we need to keep them involved, show them everything, let them know that we wasn't born with telephones, cell phones. We weren't born with any of this technology that they have access at their fingertips.
Every black elected official since 1965 owes a huge debt to those marchers. We all owe a huge debt. Let's call some names. To Martin Luther King Jr., to Ralph David Abernathy, to John Lewis, to Albert Turner, to Bob Mance, to Ralph J. Bunch, to Rosa Parks, and countless other people who did their best to make certain that even the black unborn would not have to fight those same battles as they did in 1965. Thank you very much.